When does your responsibility end after a propane customer stops buying? In this training, we'll look at why the relationship often stays alive on paper and in liability unless your company closes it out the right way. The risk usually starts quietly. A customer stops ordering, nobody marks the relationship as ended, and the account drifts into the background. Years later, there may still be a tank on the property, old service history in your files, and no clear record showing who the active supplier is now. That creates ownership confusion. The customer may think your company still owns the equipment, and your team may not have proof that the relationship ever ended. From a plaintiff attorney's point of view, that uncertainty is powerful. If your tank, your service notes, and your account records all remain in the story, your company stays in the case. They don't have to prove you made the last delivery. They can argue you knew about the location, had prior involvement, and never clearly stepped away. A neglected inactive account can become an abandoned relationship with live exposure. That's especially true when the tank is still connected or sitting ready for use. The legal argument often turns on foreseeability. If a company leaves equipment, leaves records, and leaves the customer guessing, a claim can be framed as a predictable risk. This is where companies get burned. They assumed inactivity meant closure, but nothing in the file actually shows a formal end to the supplier relationship. Think about the evidence trail. Was there a final call, a letter, a tank retrieval attempt, an account status change, or a documented handoff to another supplier? If the answer is no, the relationship may look unfinished to a jury, an insurer, or a regulator reviewing the file after an incident. The core lesson is simple. A customer stopping purchases does not automatically end your liability. You reduce exposure by proving when your role ended, what actions you took, and what equipment status existed when you closed the account. Before we go deeper, here are the main propane account offboarding exposures to watch for: tank ownership, final communication, prior service history, system condition at the last visit, poor documentation, and the customer's understanding of who still supplies the tank. First is tank ownership. If the supplier owns the tank, exposure usually lasts longer because the equipment still ties the company to the property. Another factor is no final communication. If nobody told the customer the relationship was ending, the file starts with a major gap. Open account status matters too. An account left active, suspended, or vague can make it look like service might still resume at any time. Prior service history adds weight. Deliveries, leak checks, service calls, and appliance work all show the company knew the site and its propane system. Unsafe conditions make the exposure even sharper. If the last known condition was questionable, a company needs a stronger documented response, not silence. Poor documentation is its own risk factor. If notes are thin, dates conflict, or records are missing, it becomes hard to prove what your team actually did. Customer perception also matters. If the homeowner still believes your company is their propane supplier, that belief can shape how responsibility is viewed later. That is where reliance comes in. If the customer relies on your past role and you never clearly correct that assumption, the relationship may still look active. Foreseeability is the next piece. Could a reasonable company expect confusion, unsafe use, or delayed maintenance if it left the account hanging? Documented responsibility beats assumed responsibility every time. If it's not written down, closed out, and supported by records, you're trusting memory under pressure. When you review inactive accounts, pause for a moment. Don't just ask if they stopped buying. Ask whether the file shows your company truly stopped being the supplier. That shift in mindset is what turns a weak offboarding process into a defensible one. The goal isn't to dodge responsibility. It's to define exactly when responsibility ends and show the company handled that transition properly. Without that proof, an old account can stay alive much longer than anyone intended. A strong offboarding process starts before there is a problem. Your company should define what counts as an inactive customer in clear operational terms. That threshold might be based on months without delivery, failed contact attempts, or account status rules set by policy. What matters is consistency. Once the threshold is met, the account should enter a formal inactive review, not just sit in a queue waiting for someone to remember it later. That review should confirm tank ownership, site history, open balances, prior safety issues, and whether any service or delivery activity still suggests an active relationship. Then comes the final notification. This is the most important step. It ends the supplier relationship, and it shows the customer was informed. The letter should say the account is inactive, explain what action the company intends to take, and tell the customer what they must do next if they want to continue service. It should also address equipment where needed. If the tank is company-owned, say that retrieval, lock-off, or other securing steps may follow. Keep the wording clear and professional. You are not threatening the customer. You are documenting the status of the relationship and the next procedural step. And just as important, document how the notice was sent. Certified mail, standard mail, returned mail, email logs, and call notes all matter. In many cases, the documentation is more important than the letter itself. A perfect letter that cannot be tied to the file is weak evidence. Your record should show the account review, the contact attempts, the mailed notice, the equipment status, and the final disposition of the account. If field crews visit the property, capture notes on access, tank condition, regulator status, lock-offs, tags, and any conversation at the site. Photos can be especially valuable. A dated image of the tank, tags, or disconnected status can settle questions years after memories fade. Retention matters too. Keep the mailing records, account notes, service history, ownership details, and site photos together long enough to defend the decision later. When this process is done well, the file tells a complete story. The customer became inactive, the company reviewed the risk, gave notice, handled the equipment, and documented closure. That complete story is what makes the offboarding process defensible. Without it, you are asking a future claims team to reconstruct the end of the relationship from fragments. With it, you can show exactly what happened, when it happened, and why your company no longer had an active supplier role. Tank ownership changes everything in an inactive account. If the company owns the tank, the company still has a strong connection to the risk at that property. That is why abandoned company-owned tanks are so dangerous from a liability standpoint. They can sit in place for years while everyone assumes someone else is responsible. Inactive does not mean disconnected. Gas may still be available, appliances may still be present, and the customer may still view the system as part of your service footprint. That is why retrieval procedures matter. If policy calls for pulling a company-owned tank, the file should show when retrieval was scheduled, attempted, and completed. When immediate retrieval is not possible, the equipment may need to be secured first. That can include lock-offs, tags, and clear notes about the condition found on site. A good tag helps, but only if the tag is tied to documentation. Date it, note who placed it, and connect it to the account record. Some properties create an access problem. Gates are locked, the customer is unresponsive, or the site has changed hands and nobody is sure who can authorize removal. In those cases, your team needs a documented access procedure. Note the attempts made, who was contacted, and what the next approved step will be. If a tank truly cannot be retrieved, abandonment documentation becomes critical. The record should explain why, what condition the equipment was in, and what notice was given. This is not a paperwork exercise. It is the difference between a controlled exception and a mystery tank that shows up in litigation years later. For company-owned equipment, the safest assumption is that exposure continues until the tank is retrieved or the file clearly proves why it could not be and what was done instead. That is why tank status should never be left vague at account closure. State requirements are not all the same. Some jurisdictions have stronger notice expectations, while others leave more room to general negligence standards. That means your company cannot rely on one assumption across every service area. A weak process in a strict state is risky, and a weak process in a flexible state can still be hard to defend. Some states focus more heavily on notice and customer communication. Others are shaped more by past cases, insurance expectations, and what a reasonable supplier should have done. So, even when a rule does not spell out every offboarding step, the absence of documentation can still become the story after an incident. The safest company-wide approach is to use one disciplined process that meets your internal standard first, then account for state-specific requirements where needed. In other words, do not wait for a state rule to force good documentation. Treat documentation as standard operating protection. That approach helps managers, CSRs, service teams, and sales teams all work from the same expectations instead of improvising case by case. And when state counsel or compliance leads need to adapt the process, they can do it from a strong baseline instead of rebuilding from scratch after a claim. The big takeaway is simple: different rules, same discipline. To build a defensible offboarding procedure, start with a clear inactivity threshold that tells your team when an account moves into formal review. Then identify tank ownership, review account and service history, and check for any safety or communication issues that change the risk. Send the final notice, document how it was delivered, and keep those records with the file so the communication can be proven later. Retrieve or secure company equipment, record tank status, and capture photos or field notes when site conditions matter. After that, close the account in a way that leaves no ambiguity about whether your company is still the supplier. Retain the records long enough to defend the decision. That includes notes, letters, mailing evidence, ownership details, and site documentation. When those steps are built into policy, your team is not guessing. They are following a repeatable process that protects customers and the company. Remember, this is not about avoiding responsibility. It is about documenting when responsibility properly ends. Good onboarding protects revenue. Good offboarding protects the company. Take this checklist back to your team and turn it into a standard process for every inactive Propane account. That is how you make the end of the relationship as safe and defensible as the start. As we close, remember this training was provided by Aegis Risk Engineering as part of our broader safety education program, designed to support safer decisions on the road, in the yard, and on every job. This material is provided for instructional and informational purposes only. It is meant to reinforce safe practices and support training, not replace your company's policies, official regulatory guidance, or legal advice.
Every organization remains responsible for following the laws, regulations, and internal requirements that apply to its operations, equipment, drivers, and cargo.
At Aegis General Energy, our mission is to build a stronger safety culture and improve operational performance with practical, experience-based guidance that makes safety part of the everyday job. We're proud to partner with clients through practical solutions, meaningful data, and a shared commitment to building safer operations every day. Aegis Risk Engineers help support safer communities and help our clients become best in class by turning strong standards into consistent action across the organization. Before you begin the quiz, you may find it helpful to pause after each question so you can discuss it or think through your answer before continuing. On behalf of Aegis General Energy and our risk engineering team, thank you for your time and attention. Please stand by for your 10-question quiz. Quick check. Which situation is the clearest trigger for formal inactive account review and termination risk on a residential Propane account? Please take a moment to read the options and choose your answer. I'll give you about 15 seconds. Which step should happen first in a defensible process for terminating a residential Propane customer agreement? Please take a moment to read the options and choose your answer. I'll give you about 15 seconds. Before residential Propane service is fully ended, what must be handled as part of the review before closure? Please take a moment to read the options and choose your answer. I'll give you about 15 seconds. Which action best supports proper customer communication and documentation when ending a residential Propane agreement? Please take a moment to read the options and choose your answer. I'll give you about 15 seconds. Which safety check is most important before a residential Propane agreement is fully closed out? Please take a moment to read the options and choose your answer. I'll give you about 15 seconds. Which action must be completed and documented before leaving a residential Propane service termination site? Please take a moment to read the options and choose your answer. I'll give you about 15 seconds. Which step is required when terminating residential Propane service at a customer site? Please take a moment to read the options and choose your answer. I'll give you about 15 seconds. When discontinuing residential Propane service, which responsibility related to equipment status and account handling must be completed? Please take a moment to read the options and choose your answer. I'll give you about 15 seconds. A customer is ending residential Propane service. Which action correctly confirms the service agreement has been terminated? Please take a moment to read the options and choose your answer. I'll give you about 15 seconds. Final knowledge check. Which step best shows complete follow-through when terminating a residential Propane tank agreement? Please take a moment to read the options and choose your answer. I'll give you about 15 seconds. Nice work completing the quiz. Keep bringing that same focus to safe, compliant residential Propane operations every day. Thank you again for your attention and commitment to safe operations. On behalf of Aegis General Energy and our risk engineering team, thank you for your time and attention and for the work you do to keep people, loads, and roads safer.